I have been teaching this lesson for 31 years, and no cadet has ever asked the right question at the end of it. Most of them ask the wrong one. They ask how many ships the Korrathi sent. They ask what weapons humanity used. They ask how long the campaign lasted. These are the questions of people who believe this lesson is about a war. It is not. There was no war. That is the lesson, and most cadets miss it entirely until I have already dismissed them. Close the entry displays. You will not need your records for the next 40 minutes. What I am about to tell you exists in the Fleet Doctrine Archive under a classification designation that has not been updated since the original filing, because no one has seen a reason to revisit it. The reason is that the lesson has never changed. The Korrathi hegemony. I want to hear you say it. Say it again. That is the name of the most complete extinction event in recorded galactic history. Not geological, not viral, not climatic. Administrative. Their sector designation was formally redacted from the navigational register 214 years ago. If you pull a current star chart and find a blank region in the Outer Veth corridor, you are looking at where the Korrathi were. The cartographers left the blank. They did not label it. They did not need to. I will tell you what the Korrathi were before I tell you what they did, because what they were is the only reason what they did made any sense to them. The Korrathi hegemony was not a small power. Do not make that mistake. They held 47 settled systems. They had maintained continuous territorial expansion for 600 years before the incident. Their fleet doctrine was among the most sophisticated in the Pelravian sector. I have studied it. It was genuinely impressive, by the standards of species that have never crossed into human space. Their diplomatic record was clean. Their science was advanced. They were, by every available metric, a civilization that had earned confidence. That is the first part of the lesson. Write nothing down. The Korrathi had been monitoring the species in the Sol system for approximately 60 of their years before they made their decision. 60 years of observation. They compiled reports. They had analysts, a dedicated intelligence section, 3 rotating teams, a senior assessment board that reviewed findings quarterly. Their methodology was, by the standards of the era, thorough. They reached a consensus, as a hegemony does, through their deliberative bodies and their admiralty councils, and the consensus they reached was that humanity presented a manageable territorial acquisition opportunity. Those are the words from their own pre-transmission brief. Manageable territorial acquisition opportunity. I have the original document. The translation has been reviewed by 3 separate linguistic teams across 2 centuries, and they all agree. That is what it says. Manageable, territorial, acquisition, opportunity. The Korrathi transmitted their declaration on the 14th day of the 3rd hegemony cycle, 231 years ago. The transmission was a formal instrument of intent, not a request, not an opening position for negotiation, but a declaration. Species to species. Hegemony to what they had classified as a Class 4 emergent territorial entity. I have the text of it. I am going to read one line. By the authority of the Korrathi hegemony and the consensus of its deliberative assembly, the territorial boundaries of the Sol system and its dependencies are hereby subsumed into hegemony administration, effective upon the completion of transition protocols. Cooperation will ensure continuity. Resistance is noted as an available posture, but is assessed as non-viable, given the disparity in systems, fleet tonnage, and accumulated doctrine. Resistance is noted as an available posture. They told humanity that resistance was an option they had considered and dismissed on humanity's behalf. They had done the math. They had concluded, from 60 years of external observation, that the math was settled. I want you to hold that sentence in your mind for the rest of this lecture. The transmission reached human space on schedule. The Korrathi had calculated the light delay and transmission window with precision. Their signals team was competent. The message arrived, it was received, and it was read. What followed is documented in the Korrathi's own border station logs, which we recovered later from the automated relay buoys they had positioned along their intended approach corridor. These logs are the primary source for everything I am about to tell you, because there are no surviving Korrathi to provide testimony. 14 days after the declaration transmission, the Korrathi border station at Veth 9 logged an anomalous contact at the outer edge of sensor range. The station commander filed a routine observation report. Contact type, unclassified. Bearing, inbound from Seoul corridor. Speed, within expected parameters for a courier vessel. The report notes, in the station commander's own hand, that the crew interpreted the contact as a human diplomatic response vessel. Exactly what they had expected. The declaration had been sent. A response was coming. This was the process working as intended. The station sent a standard approach acknowledgement on the hegemony's diplomatic frequency. They received a reply. The reply was not a counter-declaration. It was not a refusal. It was not a demand for negotiation or a request for clarification of terms. The relay buoy logged it as receipt confirmed. Transmission understood, no further communication anticipated from this vector. That was the entirety of the human response. The station commander filed a follow-up report characterizing the reply as irregular. He noted that the contact had not reduced speed or altered bearing after sending the receipt. He queried the Hegemony Fleet Command for guidance. The query was logged at the border station relay. A response was dispatched from Fleet Command. The response was never logged as received. The border station at Outer Veth 9 sent one more transmission after that. It was not addressed to Fleet Command. The automated relay buoy caught it because the station crew had left the buoy's uplink active in their haste to send it. The transmission was 6 words. I will not read those 6 words aloud to you today. What I will tell you is that the border station at Outer Veth 9 went silent within the hour. The automated relay buoy continued to function. It logged contacts. It logged them for the next 19 days as they moved through the approach corridor. One Korrathi installation after another, in sequence, without exception, going silent in the order a precise and unhurried force would encounter them moving inward along a single vector. Fleet Command attempted to dispatch a response. The dispatch was logged. The Fleet Command installation went silent on the 8th day. The deliberative assembly convened an emergency session on the 14th day. The session transcript is in the archive. I have read it many times. It is a long document. The deliberants are methodical people. They were a methodical species, and they worked through their procedures with the care they had always applied to procedural matters. There is a moment approximately 2 hours into the session where the first deliberant asks the question that should have been asked 60 years earlier, during the observation phase, before the declaration was ever written. He asks, what do we actually know about how they fight? The answer the assembly received, from their own analysts, their own 60 years of observation reports, was that they did not know. They had observed humanity's territorial behavior, their resource extraction, their communication patterns, their political structures. They had not observed humanity in a conflict with a peer adversary, because humanity had not been in one during the observation window. The analysts had assessed the absence of such a conflict as evidence that humanity was unlikely to be capable of conducting one. The first deliberant's next question is not recorded. The session transcript ends there. The relay buoy that carried the transmission from the assembly chamber logged one more automated ping, 22 days later, then nothing. On the 31st day after the Korrathi declaration was transmitted, a human vessel entered the space that had been the Korrathi hegemony's outermost transit corridor. It was not a warship. The vessel class is listed in the recovery documentation as a survey tender, a small craft, lightly crewed, used for boundary assessment and cartographic verification. The crew of that survey tender spent 11 days in the region. They filed a thorough report. The report is in the archive under a separate classification, and I will not be summarizing it for you today. What I will tell you is what the survey tender's crew did before they left. They placed a marker buoy at the edge of the blank region. The buoy carries a single automated transmission on the hegemony's own diplomatic frequency, the same frequency the Korrathi had used for their declaration. The transmission loops continuously. It has been looping for 214 years. The transmission says, boundary acknowledged, approach inadvisable. 3 words changed. The rest is the same structure the Korrathi used. I have stood in this lecture hall for 31 years, and I have watched cadets process that detail. And every year there is a moment, you can see it cross their faces, when they understand that the humans did not compose that transmission as a threat. They composed it as a courtesy. They put the marker there, so that the next species coming through the corridor would not blunder into the blank region without warning. That is what you need to understand about the humans, and it is the only thing you need to understand. They did not declare anything before they acted. They sent a receipt. They acknowledged the declaration the way you acknowledge a delivery. Sign here, contents received, we know what this is, and then they addressed it. Not the declaration, the Korrathi. They addressed the Korrathi, and then they put up a polite marker so no one else would trip over the same mistake. The Korrathi assessed humanity as a Class 4 emergent territorial entity and told them that resistance was not viable. The humans read that assessment and did not dispute it, and did not answer it, and did not negotiate with it. They simply resolved it. 31 days. The Korrathi had held 47 settled systems for 600 years. They were, as I said, not a small power. They had 600 years of accumulated doctrine and a deliberative assembly that had functioned without interruption for most of that time, and a fleet that was genuinely, legitimately formidable by every reasonable standard. 31 days. I have one more thing to tell you before I open the floor. In the Doctrine Archive, in the filing adjacent to the Korrathi incident, there is a catalog of every species that has transmitted a declaration of intent into human space in the 2 centuries since the Korrathi. The catalog has 9 entries. And every entry is the same. Declaration transmitted, receipt confirmed by human response. No further communication on record. Sector designation subsequently revised on navigational charts. 9 entries in 200 years. The 10th entry has not been filed. I do not expect it will be filed in my lifetime. The blank regions on your navigational charts are not errors. They are not unmapped. They are not redacted for administrative reasons, or for the convenience of the charting authority. They are blank because the cartographers know what is in them, and they have decided that the information does not improve the chart. If you find yourself approaching a blank region, you have already made a navigational error. Correct your heading. Do not query the region. Do not send a probe. Do not transmit a greeting, a hail, an inquiry, or a declaration of any kind. Turn your vessel around and file the heading correction with your log, and never mention the region's coordinates in any communication that travels on an open frequency. This is fleet doctrine. It is the oldest standing doctrine in the Pelravian Accord, and it has never been amended because it has never needed to be. The Korrathi told humanity that resistance was not viable. They were correct. Humanity did not resist them. Humanity simply decided that the Korrathi's assessment of the situation was the last assessment the Korrathi would ever make, and then humanity made their own assessment, and then there were no more Korrathi to dispute it. Does anyone have a question? No. Good. That is the correct answer. That is the only correct answer. If you had a question, it would mean you had not understood what the silence means, and understanding what the silence means is the entire lesson. You are dismissed. Leave the entry displays dark. I do not watch them go. I never do. I stand at the front of the chamber, and I listen to the sound of 32 cadets filing out through the back corridor, and every year, it is the same sound. Quiet. No one speaks. No one asks a question in the corridor that they did not ask in the chamber. They go to their next assignment in silence, and they carry the silence with them, and that is the correct way to carry it. The marker buoy at the edge of what was the Korrathi hegemony is still transmitting. 214 years, and it has not stopped. Boundary acknowledged. Approach inadvisable. Somewhere in the blank region, something has been hearing it for 214 years. It has not replied. Neither has anyone else.